Okay, welcome back to the third in this series on the t-test. Um, I wanted to keep on the screen the previous t-test we did in which I contrasted our alcohol consumption by Asian students versus Hispanic students. Now, one thing we've talked about in class briefly, and I want to use this example to illustrate more clearly, is something we call statistical power. The more subjects we have in a study, the greater our statistical power will be. In this case, we don't have that many. Recall that in the study between males and females, we had 1,600 participants. Here we have about 120 participants. So when the number of participants in the study goes down, or when we're working with a smaller sample size, our statistical power becomes reduced. So what that means is that had we 1,600 students in this study, this difference between these two means could have been statistically different. Let me just say that again. When we have fewer subjects in a study, our statistical power is reduced, and that's very much the same as the power on a microscope. We do not have the ability to see as fine a detail when we have low power. So just imagine you're looking through a microscope at a very small cellular structure. With a high-powered microscope, you'll be able to see differences between parts of a cell than you would if you had a low-powered microscope. Well, the same thing with statistical power. When we have high statistical power, we're able to detect small differences between groups, whereas when we have low power, those differences may not show up as being statistically different. So now, if we had had 700, I'm just guessing, if we'd had 700 and 400 relative in this study between Asians and Hispanics, this mean difference of whatever that is could have shown up as being statistically different, because we would have more subjects, we would have more power, and that's like turning the microscope lens to a higher power, and we'd be able to detect a smaller difference between the two groups. So that's something I want to focus on really to make sure you get that. So if I were you, I would go ahead and just sit down for a moment and think about this idea. The more participants we have in a study, the greater our ability is to reject the null hypothesis, even when the raw differences in the means is small. Now you see this very clearly in all of the literature we see about that males and females are different in their SAT verbal scores, with females scoring higher than males. And yet the relative distance between the males and the females in terms of their means is really pretty small. The reason we're able to say that females score higher in their SAT verbal scores is that oftentimes those studies are conducted on the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of high school students who take the SAT every year. So we have we have an electron microscope kind of power to detect even tiny differences between males and females in those scores. So this is just a very short video to point out this idea of statistical power. If I were you, I would make sure you understood this, because it's something that is important in how we interpret the results from tests about health education or other kinds of tests that we see in public health. Okay, we're going to stop this right now, and then we'll come back for a video having to do with some more SPSS.